The chair they gave me was in the corner, not exactly pushed away from the table, not completely excluded either, just placed off to the side, like an afterthought someone remembered at the last minute but didn't really want to deal with. I sat down without saying a word, unfolded my napkin, and watched Gerald Whitfield pour wine for everyone at the table, his wife, his son, his daughter, my son, before reaching behind the cart for a different bottle to fill my glass. A different bottle. A cheaper bottle. The label was turned away so I couldn't read it, as if he was doing me a favor by hiding it. And my son Caleb, my boy, the kid I raised alone from the time he was 2 years old. Caleb looked at his water glass and didn't say a single word. And in that exact moment, sitting in the corner of a Buckhead mansion, wearing a polo shirt I had deliberately bought to look like someone who didn't belong there, I made a decision that would change every relationship in that room before the night was over. Because what Gerald Whitfield didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was what the man they had just served the cheap wine to was truly holding. My name is Raymond Cole. I am 57 years old. I run a cybersecurity and digital infrastructure firm that I built from a single-bedroom office in Southwest Atlanta with one laptop and a government contract nobody else wanted because the paperwork was too complicated. That was 19 years ago. These days, my company holds federal clearance-level contracts, has been on the Forbes technology list 3 times, and cleared just under $40 million in revenue last year. My executive assistant Michelle manages a calendar that includes names I'm not supposed to drop in casual conversation. My wine cellar at home holds a bottle of 2014 Opus 1 I've been saving for Caleb's next big milestone. Caleb has no idea any of this exists. I want to explain why, because I know how it sounds. Rich man pretends to be poor, plays games with his own kid, hides the truth for what? Pride? Control? I understand why that looks manipulative from the outside. But the real reason starts with a woman named Lorena, and a night I've never fully let go of. Lorena was Caleb's mother. We were 26 when he was born, married young, struggling the way most young couples struggle when ambition is bigger than the bank account. I was working 60-hour weeks building something she couldn't see yet. She could only see what wasn't there, the car that wasn't new, the apartment that wasn't big enough, the vacations we didn't take. When Caleb was 22 months old, she told me she was leaving, that she hadn't signed up to raise a child in this, that I was never going to be the kind of man who could give her the life she wanted. Her exact words. I've carried them for 55 years. I still hear them when I pull into the driveway of my modest-looking house in a neighborhood where nobody knows my net worth. I held Caleb while he cried for 3 nights straight. He was too young to know what he was crying for. I knew exactly what I was crying for. And I made myself a promise in that apartment that I would raise this boy to understand that a person's worth has nothing to do with what they can hand you. I would raise him to earn his own way. I would keep my success invisible, until I was absolutely certain that the love in his life was built on something real. And for 26 years, it worked. Caleb graduated with honors, built his own career in marketing, never once came to me asking for a handout, only occasionally for a shared meal when things were tight, which is all any good parent really wants anyway. I was so proud of him I could barely stand it. Then he called me 3 weeks ago with a nervous energy I hadn't heard since his high school driving test. He had been with his wife Brittany for 3 years, married for 1. The Whitfields, Brittany's parents, had apparently been requesting this dinner since the wedding, and Caleb had been strategically running interference on my behalf. He finally ran out of excuses. Dad, they really want to meet you. I just need you to make a good impression. Okay? Maybe don't mention the focus. And if anybody asks about work, just say IT consulting. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. I remember sitting in my car outside my office building after that call, looking at the reflection of my building in the glass tower across the street, the building that has my company's name on the directory, and thinking, my son is ashamed of me. The morning of the dinner, I stood in my walk-in closet and chose carefully. On the left side, Italian suits, custom shirts, 2 pairs of dress shoes that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. On the right side, what Caleb has always seen. A faded blue polo from a big box store, khaki pants hemmed slightly wrong, brown loafers with a small scuff I'd kept specifically for occasions like this. I put on the polo, the khakis, the loafers, looked in the mirror, looked like exactly what the Whitfields expected to see. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The Whitfield estate sits on 3 acres in Buckhead, The kind of property that announces its own importance before you get to the gate. Perfectly edged hedges, circular driveway with a fountain at its center. 3 luxury vehicles in visible parking, arranged like a still life. I parked my 2009 Ford Focus on the street between a landscaping trailer and a catering van, exactly where Caleb had instructed me to park. I walked to the side entrance he'd specified. I rang the bell. The woman who answered looked at me the way people look at an unexpected package, confused, slightly inconvenienced. "Can I help you?" "I'm Raymond, Caleb's father. I'm here for dinner." Her expression reorganized itself into something professionally neutral. "Of course. Please follow me." The foyer was larger than the entire ground floor of my visible house. Real marble. Original artwork I recognized from a gallery I'd attended in New York. One piece I knew had been purchased at auction for north of $200,000. A chandelier overhead that probably cost more than the Ford sitting outside. I noted all of this calmly, the way you note weather. It was information, not intimidation. Caleb spotted me from across the room and his face did something complicated. Relief that I'd arrived. Horror at the polo. He crossed to me fast. "Dad. Hey, you made it." He hugged me, and I could feel him scanning my outfit over my shoulder. Gerald Whitfield rose slowly from his chair. Silver-haired, deeply tanned in the way that comes from a life of leisure rather than labor. He extended a hand with a grip designed to communicate dominance firm. Just a half-second too long. "Raymond. We've heard so much about you." The way he said it suggested that what he'd heard had not been reassuring. Diane Whitfield did not stand. She extended one hand from her seat, wrist slightly elevated, the way royalty extends a hand for kissing. She said, "How lovely. You must be exhausted, the traffic coming from... Where is it you live?" When I named my neighborhood, she repeated it back with the specific tone that people use to describe mild inconveniences. How quaint. Then there was Preston Brittany's brother. Late 20s, soft in the way that comes from never being hungry, wearing a Wharton alumni shirt like a credential. He gave me a small wave from across the table. Not a standing wave. A finger wave. Like I was someone he might tip. "I want to stop here for a moment and tell you something honestly. I have sat across from senators. I have been in rooms with people who have enough power to change the trajectory of entire industries. None of them ever made me feel as small as that finger wave. Not because Preston had power over me, but because he had no idea he didn't." The seating arrangement confirmed everything. Gerald at the head of the table, Diane at the opposite end, Preston and Brittany flanking their mother, Caleb beside Brittany, and me at a chair that had been added to the corner, not quite at the table. Not quite excluded. The purgatory position, the "you don't quite belong here, but we're too polite to say so" seat. I sat down. I kept my face pleasant. I folded my hands and waited. The first course arrived, 3 leaves of something purple on a plate, with a decorative drizzle that cost more per gram than saffron. Diane explained it was prepared by their personal chef, trained in Lyon. I nodded appreciatively. I have a chef at my second property who trained in the same city. I said nothing. Gerald began his assessment immediately. "So, Raymond, IT Consulting, is that right? Small businesses, I imagine? Local work." I said I worked with clients of varying sizes. He nodded the way people nod when they've already decided the answer doesn't interest them. Preston jumped in. "That must be tough in this market. All the real disruption is happening in AI infrastructure. I'm actually developing a platform right now that's going to redefine how companies think about digital identity." I looked at him steadily. 3 years of development?" He blinked. "How did you... Yes. Roughly. We're still in the conceptual phase." Of course you are, I thought. 3 years in the conceptual phase. I had built and sold an entire company in that time. Diane turned to Caleb with the warmth you reserve for someone you're barely tolerating. "You've done so well for yourself considering your circumstances. I'm sure it wasn't easy, growing up the way you did. Growing up without..." She waved her hand vaguely. "Advantages. His circumstances." I watched Caleb's jaw tighten, and then I watched him say nothing. That was the second wound of the evening. Not Diane's words, those were exactly what I expected. It was Caleb's silence that cut. My son, who I'd raised to speak up when something was wrong, sat there and looked at his salad while his mother-in-law reduced his entire childhood to a sympathetic footnote. If you have ever been in a room where someone spoke about your life like it was a problem to be managed, You know what that silence from the people who love you feels like. You know how it echoes. I kept my face still and reached for my water glass and breathed through it. Gerald, apparently warmed up, decided to be generous. Raymond, if you're ever looking to diversify, maybe get into something more scalable. I know a group doing very well right now. There's a minimum buy-in, usually 50,000, but I could probably get you in for 10. As a courtesy, I recognized the structure of the pitch immediately. I'd seen it before in different packaging. I said, "That's very generous, Gerald." He smiled like he'd just handed me a gift. Then Diane said, "Oh, and I have several bags of Gerald's clothing in the garage. Wonderful quality. You look about the same size." She glanced at my polo with the specific expression of someone trying not to visibly wince. They might be useful for nicer occasions. There it was. I have never in my life wanted to say something more than I wanted to say something in that moment. The 2015 Domaine de la Romanée Conti in my personal wine cellar. The 3 vacation properties I own outright. The government contract I'd signed 3 weeks earlier that carried a higher dollar value than the Whitfield estate was currently worth, which, I happen to know from publicly available records, was mortgaged 3 times over. I said, "That's so kind of you, Diane. Thank you." And I kept waiting. My phone buzzed. I had told Michelle, my executive assistant, exactly when to call and exactly what to say. I glanced at the screen, then looked up at the table. "I apologize, I need to take this." "Work emergency." Diane's eyes narrowed. "At this hour? I suppose when you're hourly, you take whatever comes in." I stepped into the hallway, made sure to stay within earshot of the dining room. Michelle's voice was perfectly calibrated. "Mr. Cole, I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner," Northrop's legal team confirmed. "They want to execute the contract Monday full scope, $8.4 million. Also, the NSA cleared your Level 4 access for the infrastructure review. When do you want me to schedule the briefing?" I replied, "Monday at 9 for Northrop. Send the clearance documentation to my secure server. And tell Forbes I'm still not available for comment. I'd like to stay out of the press cycle this quarter." "Yes, sir. Anything else?" "That's all, Michelle. Enjoy your evening." I walked back into the dining room. The table had gone very quiet. Gerald's fork was suspended in midair. Preston's mouth was slightly open. Diane had set down her wine glass. Caleb was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Which, I supposed, was not entirely wrong. "Did you say 8 million?" Preston asked. 8.4, I said, sitting back down. "Mid-size contract for us, honestly." "Where were we?" "I think you were explaining your platform, Preston." Preston said nothing. Gerald cleared his throat. "I may have misheard. Did you say NSA?" I reached for my water glass. "I keep some government work, yes. Boring stuff. Compliance, mostly. Security architecture." The silence stretched. Then I reached into my jacket pocket for a handkerchief deliberately, unhurriedly, and my American Express Centurion card slid out of my wallet and landed on the white tablecloth with a small, unmistakable metallic sound. Black, heavy, the card that isn't applied for. The card that arrives by invitation only. Every eye in the room landed on it. "Oh," I said, picking it up. "Sorry about that. These metal cards are a nuisance at airport security." Preston grabbed his phone, started typing. His face changed the way faces change when something you were certain about suddenly stops being certain. He turned the screen toward Gerald without a word. Gerald looked at it, then at me, then back at it. His face went through 4 distinct expressions in approximately 2 seconds. "That's Gerald started. Raymond Cole," Caleb said slowly. His voice was strange. "Dad, is that a Forbes profile?" I didn't lie. I just said, "They do like to exaggerate." Brittany leaned across and took Preston's phone. Scrolled. Her face went white. "Mom," she said quietly, "look at this." She passed it to Diane. Diane read it, set the phone down, picked up her wine glass, the good wine, I noticed, not the separate bottle they'd poured for me, and took a long, slow sip. The room had become a very different place. I want you to understand what was happening in my chest in that moment. Because it was not triumph. I am going to be honest with you. It was grief. I was watching my son's face reorganize itself around a version of his father he had never been shown, and I was wondering how much of his silence tonight had come from embarrassment about who he thought I was, And how much of it would have been different if he'd known the truth? That question hurt more than anything the Whitfields had said all evening. I looked at Gerald. His whole posture had shifted, the easy authority was gone, replaced by something more calculating, more careful. "David," he said, then caught himself. "Raymond, I think there may have been some miscommunication this evening. We'd love to hear more about your work. In fact, I have a few ventures that could use a strategic investor of your experience." There it was, the pivot. I watched the warmth appear in his eyes like a light being switched on, and I understood exactly what I was seeing. It wasn't personal. It wasn't even cynical, really. It was just Pavlovian. A number appeared, and his behavior changed. Because for Gerald Whitfield, numbers had always been the only language that mattered. "That investment opportunity you mentioned earlier," I said quietly, "the one with the 50,000 minimum buy-in, that's a multi-level marketing structure, Gerald. You know that, right?" His face tightened. "It's a legitimate. It's a scheme," I said, not unkindly. "And based on what I know about your current financial situation, you cannot afford to be recruited into it any more than you already have been." Gerald went very still. "How would you court filings or public record?" I said. Chapter 11 Restructuring. 8 months ago. I believe the initial filing listed $2.3 million in unsecured debt. The house is mortgaged 3 times. The vehicles are leased. I know because I checked before I came tonight. I wanted to understand who my son had married into. I needed to know if you were people of substance or people of performance. Gerald's face had gone the specific gray of someone who has just been seen through completely. Victoria Diane sat perfectly still, her hand pressed flat on the table. I turned to Preston. "The app you've been developing for 3 years, the one about redefining digital identity, I'd encourage you to look up a company called Frameshift Tech. They launched the same concept in 2022 and shut down in 14 months. But more importantly, and I say this because Brittany loves you, nobody is going to fund a concept from someone who has never written a single line of code. If you want to build something real, I know people who run legitimate technical boot camps. Not theory, actual skills." Preston looked at the table. I looked at Diane. "That wine you've been pouring for me, the one from the separate bottle, it's a 2016 Cakebread Cellars Reserve. It retails for around $260. The bottle you've been serving everyone else is about $40 at Total Beverage. You made the wrong call on that one." Diane's wine glass hit the table harder than she intended. But none of that was why I stood up. I stood up because of Caleb. I looked at my son, my boy, who I had held in a small apartment in southwest Atlanta, when he was not yet 2 years old, who I had raised alone, who I had watched become the kind of man I had prayed he would become. And I said, as quietly and as clearly as I could manage, "You didn't say a word, son. Not once. They called your childhood a disadvantage. They offered your father charity clothes. They poured me a different bottle of wine. And you sat there and looked at your water glass. I need you to understand what that felt like." Caleb's face crumpled. The table went so still I could hear the fountain running outside. "I didn't raise you to fit in," I said. "I raised you to stand up. And tonight you chose their approval over your father's dignity. I need to know if that is the man you want to be." I picked up my jacket from the corner chair, the purgatory chair, and walked to the door. The drive down the Whitfield driveway felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 3 hours. I sat in my focus on the street and did not turn the key. I just breathed. The adrenaline was dissolving into something heavier, sadder. I had done what I came to do. I had seen what I needed to see. But it still hurt. It always hurts when you're right about something you were hoping to be wrong about. The passenger door opened. Caleb climbed in. His eyes were red. His voice, when he spoke, was the voice of a much younger version of him, the voice I remembered from the night he didn't make the travel baseball team, sitting in this same kind of car. "Dad, I'm so sorry. Please talk to me." I stared at the steering wheel for a long moment. Then I told him about Lorena, about the night she left, about the promise I made in that apartment while he cried and didn't know what he was crying for. "I wanted you to love me as your father," I said, "not as a resource. And I wanted to raise you to know the difference between a person's value and their bank account. But tonight I watched you fail that test, Caleb. Not because you're a bad person, because you got scared. And scared people go quiet." He was crying. "I know," he said. "I know I did. And I don't have an excuse. I wanted them to accept me. And somewhere along the way, I started performing for them instead of being myself. The back door opened. Brittany got in. She had clearly been crying for longer. She looked at me directly, which took courage, and she said, "Mr. Cole, I am ashamed of my family. I have been ashamed of them for years. I just didn't have the language for it until tonight. I watched my parents become completely different people the moment they found out what you were worth, and I don't want to live like that. I don't want to raise children who live like that." I looked at these two young people in my Ford Focus on a Buckhead street at 9:30 at night, and I felt something shift. Not triumph. Something quieter and more durable than that. Hope, maybe. The old-fashioned kind. Here is what this night taught me, and I have thought about it many times since. Money does not change people. It reveals them. It takes what is already there and makes it visible. The Whitfields showed me their real values the moment they thought I had nothing to offer them. And Caleb showed me something too, not his worst self, but his most frightened self. There is a difference. The frightened self can be worked with. The frightened self can learn. I told them both. You want to build something real? Then you start from the bottom. I will teach you what I know, not give you what I've built. You will make mistakes. You will have months where it doesn't work, and you will be better for all of it, if you do it honestly. Deal, they both said, almost in unison. 7 months later, Caleb and Brittany launched a small digital marketing consultancy out of their apartment. They drive used cars. They live within what they earn. They call me on Sunday evenings and we talk about strategy and mistakes and what they're learning. Last month, they landed their third client. Caleb called me at 7 in the morning, voice cracking, to tell me. I pulled over to the side of the road and cried in my Focus. Good tears. The Whitfields lost the Buckhead house 4 months after that dinner. Gerald and Diane are renting now in a suburb 30 minutes outside the city. Preston took a junior developer position at a startup entry level. Real work. Actual code. Last I heard, he was doing well. Sometimes the bottom is the only honest starting point. I still drive the Focus. I still wear the polo shirts. I still park on the street when I don't need to make a statement. Because the car doesn't tell you where you're going. It just takes you there. And where I'm going, I already know. I'm going toward a Sunday dinner with my son and his wife in a small apartment where the furniture doesn't match. The pasta might be slightly overcooked, and the conversation is completely real. That, it turns out, is worth more than anything in any wine cellar anywhere. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a 1-inch the comments if you think Raymond was right to keep his secret. All those years, some lessons have to be earned, not handed down. Drop a 2 if you think Caleb deserved to know the truth earlier. Or drop a 3 if you've ever been in a room where someone looked right through you, and you want Raymond to know he is not alone in that. Tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there right now. I read every single comment, and it is the only reason I keep telling these stories. If this hits something real in you, if you've ever hidden who you are to protect what matters, or stayed quiet when you should have spoken up, or watched someone you love choose the wrong approval, then sit with this question tonight. Whose version of you are you performing, and what would it cost you to stop? If you are new here and this story found its way to you, please consider subscribing. I share stories like this because I believe the truest things we carry deserve to be said out loud. I would love to have you here for the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined, set in Atlanta, Georgia, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, families, or events is entirely coincidental.